Welcome. I've been doing a series of videos on upgrading my 2021 KZ Escape E17 hatch to lithium batteries. So if you want to see my previous videos, I'll put a link below to my playlist. Where I left off in the last video, I installed the batteries under the bed and I got everything wired up, and it's mostly functional, but I'm using a Renogy shunt, and to read that shunt, I have the Renogy ONE Core display, and currently I have this hooked up to USB plugged into this outlet back here, and I want to do a more permanent install of this. So I want to install this up here. Now the way this comes from the factory, we have the light switches, we have the awning switch, and this is the inverter switch. So this is the Go Power inverter switch, and I'm going to be switching to a different inverter. It will also have a remote, but I'll address that in a second. But what I wanted to do is move the awning switch up here, and then move these light switches here, and then move the core one here. So to do that, I switched to a Lippert switch. The switch that was here was not wide enough to cover the opening or the hole here left by the inverter switch. So I just got this other switch because I noticed it had a wider bezel, and it fits there nicely. There's a little bit of tear out here on the sides, but that actually was visible with the inverter switch, so it's no big deal. So next I'll be moving this switch over to here and mounting the core one here. Now the core one needs power. There are a couple ways to power this. You can use USB, or you can use, it's like 0 to 30 volts or something. I forget the exact number, but it'll easily run off 12 volts. And that plugs into the green connector there. But the way I've set this up is with this switch here. So the switch allows me to turn on RV power or only solar power. And I want to run this even when the RV power is off. So I want to run power from back here up to my cabinet. Now running wires would be kind of a pain in the butt, but I have another solution. The inverter switch used this RJ11 wire. So this is like a telephone wire. Let me get this out of here. So this is the type of wire you'd use to plug a phone into the wall with. Now this is a very small gauge wire, but the Renogy ONE Core is very low power. There are also 4 conductors here, and we only need 2. So I got these little adapters. Let me pull this out of the package. And I do want to say, I could just trim this wire and do the same thing I'm going to do with the adapters. I just thought this was going to be a little bit easier to do. And also, this can be reversed. So this is an RJ11 to terminal adapter, and I can plug one of these into each side, and then we can screw wires to this. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to connect the wires up from this to the Renogy Core, and then on the other end, I'll connect the wires up to the battery. Now I can just use 2 of these conductors. And if I did my calculation right, I think this can handle the power easily. But what I'm going to do is I'll just double this up. So I'll have like 1 and 2 be positive and 3 and 4 be negative. Now, if I really wanted to, I could actually have all 4 of these be positive and find another ground wire in here. But I like the idea of just hooking this up to positive and ground for 2 of these conductors. So I'm going to get this wired up and then I'll test it out. Oh, and I did forget to mention these wires here. This is not normally like this. There's normally a panel here. So there was a screw in the back. I removed the screw and there were some staples here and I popped those out and I actually installed some screws here so I can remove this panel in the future for different things. So I do need to remove that switch, but I'm going to get the Renogy Core wired up so I can test it before I mess with moving all of that. Okay, so I'm down here at my bench, and this is the wire that came with the Renogy ONE Core for hooking it up. So you have this long wire, we have ring terminals here that will go on the battery, and we have the connector on the other end. So this looks like it has some ferrules connected to it. Let's see. Yep, I don't know if I have any that small. Let me look. I'll get my ferrule crimper tool out, not required. So what I'm going to do is snip this cable, and I will wire it into here, and then I'll snip the other end and wire it into here. So I want to make sure when I go to 1, 2 on here, it's going to be the same on both ends. So it's hard to know exactly how much I want to snip. And actually I can leave the other end long, so I'll just cut this one to start. And I could just get some other wire too and leave this, but I'll just go like that. So these are combined. I'll use a stripper here to try and strip this down a little bit. See, okay. So if I stripped it at 12 gauge with this, I was able to free the 2 conductors. So I'll go ahead and do that again. So I want to double these up, so I need a little bit extra cable here. So this is 22 gauge cable, so I'm going to get my ferrule kit out, and you don't have to use these, but since I have them, I'll use them. I'll use the 22 gauge, and I'll strip the ends here. I may want these longer even. Okay, I made these a little longer. I can always cut them down, but they're easier to handle this way. So I'll strip the end here. I'll give it a little twist so I can fit it in the ferrule. So I'll crimp that down. Okay, so that's tight. I'll do the red. So now I want to combine these into one, and you typically don't do this, but I'll get the next size up, which is for 20 gauge cable, and I'll see if I can fit them both in here and crimp them together. This would probably work just as well, or maybe even better to solder them. Okay, so we have our connector made up. Now I did a search online and the telephone cable is 24 gauge. This is 22 gauge and it says if you double up a 24 gauge, it's equal to around a 21 gauge. So it'll have a little bit higher rating than this wire. Okay, so now I'll put it into the terminal. So I'll put the doubled up ones in the middle. So I'll put them on 2 and 3. So positive will go to 2, negative will go to 3, like so. And I'll tighten those down. Okay, then I'll put the second positive in 1 and the second negative in 4. There we go. So 1 and 2 are positive, 3 and 4 are negative. And I haven't changed these, I'll just leave that as is. So now I'm going to do the same thing to the other side. I'm not going to film that. Not sure how long I need this. I know the phone cord's pretty long. I'll probably leave a couple feet on here. Okay, so here I have my adapter. This is the battery end, so this will connect to the terminals of the battery. The phone line will plug in here. The other end of the phone line in the cabinet will plug in here, and this will plug into the Renogy ONE Core. Now you can see I made the loops a lot smaller on this one than I did this one. It's just kind of harder to handle the wire when it's really short. So this will take this 22 gauge wire and send it over the 24 gauge wire, and the positive and negative will each be on a pair of wires. So it may be overkill, but this gives me some peace of mind that the telephone wire will handle the current going through it. So let's head out to the camper and test this out. Okay, so I've opened up the hatch. Now this is a hatch I created. I covered it in a previous video. I'm going to be connecting this up to the battery. So I'll hook it up on opposite terminals. I'll hook it up here and here, which are the main terminals I use to connect up the battery to the system. And here's the phone wire coming out that was connected to the inverter. Now before I connect this up, I do want to turn this off. Now it's getting dark outside, but I will shut the solar off first over here. And then I'll turn power off. So now we've shut down power to the RV. I don't want any surges or spikes as I disconnect the battery. So I'm going to get this connected up down here, and then I'll connect it up in the cabinet. I'm not installing the Renogy ONE Core yet. I'm just going to test it first. Okay, so I got this connected up. Now I split this cable to be able to bridge the distance between the positive and negative, but I realized after the fact that actually I could hook the negative up to the negative terminal bus over here, which is closer to the positive terminal. I really only need the positive cable on the positive battery terminal because I want it to have constant power even when the battery is switched off. The negative is always connected to the negative terminal. And actually it should be on there so the power consumption of the Renogy Core is monitored by the shunt. So I'm going to test this, but just know that I'm going to be switching the cable from the negative terminal to the negative terminal bus. So I have that plugged in over here. I'll unplug this. We have the other adapter here, and I'll just double check here that the black and red coincide with plus and minus on here. This is how it was wired from the factory, but that does look good. So I'll plug that in, and then I'll plug this in the cabinet. Now the battery is still off, but this should be powered. And there we have power. So next I'll have to move these switches over here so I can put the Renogy Core here. Now you may wonder why I don't just put the Renogy Core here. Well, when we come in the door, this is the most accessible place to turn a switch on when it's dark. This is really close to the door, so it's kind of hard to reach up to here because you haven't stepped in yet. It's hard to explain, but if you were to step in this RV door, this is an easier place to access the switches. But certainly I could have put the Renogy Core here instead. Okay, so next I want to move this over here. So to get this front plate off, I'll just take a screwdriver under here and I'll pop it off. I may need two hands here. Oh, there we go. And then we have two screws here. So I'll pull these out and I'll have to take the wires off and I'll keep track of where they're at. And then I may need to enlarge this hole. I don't know, I might be able to say reuse this screw hole and put another hole lower. I'll have to figure that out. Now, one thing to point out is these screws tend to strip out easily. If it's stripped out really bad, you could always glue a real small block of wood on the backside, let it dry up, drill a hole in there, and then you have a nice place for that screw to mount to. Now, I do have the power off when I do this because this does have live power going to it. So an interesting thing to point out, I just saw one of these for sale, and this switch was over here, the awning was over here, and the inverter switch was up higher, but it was a little bit lower than mine is. I found that kind of odd that the same model would have a different layout. So this is what it looks like as I pull this out. We have red on the bottom, then we have gray and white, and we have the two white on the top, and then we have solid yellow and white stripe here. So this is a big opening. So I'm going to need to mount this plate here. So I'm not sure I don't want to mount the core first and then mount this, because ideally I want the center lines of them to be even, or the top or bottom, some portion of them. So I'm not completely sure which I'm going to put in first. I'll let you know what I decide. Okay, so if I take this and put this in here, it doesn't move up and down very much. It does move side to side quite a bit. So in this hole. Now I notice if I move it all the way to the right, it does cover the hole over here. So I'd probably rather have it like that than over to the left, So I think I'm going to mount it like this. I'll put a screw in here, a screw in here. That's probably enough to hold it, but I could also put a little block of wood back here and put a third screw in. So I think I'll take the center point of this, which actually there's very little play here. So the center point of this opening, I'll mark that over here and I'll center this on it so these two are centered with each other. If you look at these two pieces, the cover plate and the mounting plate, these are about the same width. Although this is a little bit taller, so I could line the top or bottom up. I'm just going to line them up on centers. So I'll probably end up doing a little bit of cutting to this, and I don't think I'll have to do any cutting to this. Okay, I got this switch moved over, and I didn't have to cut very much. I actually just took a utility knife, and I trimmed down the edge right here, and it fit in fine. So this side is done. I can clip the plate on, like so. And now I just have to mount the Renogy ONE Core. Now I did turn the battery on and test these, and they are working fine. Now I did square these up with the cabinet, and I'll probably square the Renogy Core up with the cabinet also. This is used for leveling, so I do want it level. My camper is just slightly out of level, but I'm guessing the cabinet is relatively level, and we'll get to calibrate that. But I don't really want the Renogy ONE Core to be perfectly level with the ground. But if this cabinet is slightly out of level, I'd rather have the switches and the Renogy line up with it rather than be perfectly level. Okay, so I got the Renogy Core 1 mounting plate installed. So we can see it's just off of level, and if I put this level up here against the bottom of the cabinet, it's at a similar level. So the way I aligned this is I took this carpenter square and I put it up against the bottom of the cabinet, and then I lined up the top edge of this with the straight part on the mount. So this should be level with the cabinet. When I level out the trailer, I'm guessing that'll be very close to level. Now on the back side here, where there wasn't a screw hole, I just built that up and put a board behind it so I'd have something to screw into. So now I can pass the wire through that hole and connect it up. Okay, so I plugged this in here. So I'll just put this on and I'll rotate it on there and I'll just clip it in place like so. So now I can peel off the plastic. So this might take a minute before it connects up to everything. So this is where we're at now. We have the Renogy ONE Core, we have the light switches, and we have the awning switch up here. So I think that looks really nice there. I'll eventually have to go in here and set up the leveling, so I'll have to go to settings and leveling. So I'll have to change the orientation. So this is facing the front of the trailer. So I'd have to hit this one, and here it's saying we're off 1.1 degrees front to back, and the left side is too low. Let's see if there's a calibration on here. So there is a calibration. So I'm going to manually level this, and then I'll manually calibrate it. I'm going to check to see if this is even with the bottom of the cabinet. I'm curious about that. So I set my carpenter square to the bottom of the LCD screen, and it's even all across here. It's not easy to show on camera, but I'd say that's very even with the bottom of the cabinet. Now this sits very, very flush to the cabinet, so it's really sleek. So if we look at it from this angle, it doesn't hardly even stick out more than these switches. So my next step down here will be to install a strap over the battery, and may do one around it too. I don't have enough room to film down here, so I'm going to do it and then I'll come back and show you what I did. So these are the straps I'll be using. They have these stainless steel brackets. So I'm going to screw these down and then I'll run the strap through them to hold the battery down. I may also put some padding under the battery, but again, I'm going to get this situated and I'll come back and let you know what I finally decided to do. Okay, so the first thing I did is I pulled the batteries out of the way and I put some of this padding under them. So this is tool chest drawer liner. It's not a tremendous amount of padding. It easily compresses, but it's what I had on hand, and it'll just give a tiny bit of cushion under the batteries. Now I don't want to do too much cushioning because then the straps could loosen up. Okay, so I made this brace to go on top of the batteries. So I took a piece of wood and I curved it on both sides, and it's very, very handmade looking. It's not anything fancy. I took some router bits and cut a little channel in here. I could have also used a file or sanded it. So this will sit on top of the battery and the strap will run in here, and this will even out the pressure from the straps and help hold the middle of the batteries down a little bit better. So on the bottom I put some double stick tape, and I'm just going to attach some of this foam to it to give a little bit of cushioning and help it from sliding around. Okay, so I have the brace installed. I put a bracket down below and up high, and I mounted the bracket in the back a little bit lower than the top of this because I do want it to pull down a little bit. So I looped it under that metal bracket and back over this. So this is 2 layers thick and this is 2 layers thick, and I put it through the latch and pulled tight. You can slide this just a little bit if you try, and then I wrap the excess around here. Okay, so I poked a number of holes in the camper with this project, and there are actually some holes that were used and are no longer being used. So I'm going to seal those up with this RV underbody tape. So it has this like woven mesh here, and it's meant to match the underbody covering of RVs. So I'm just going to cut this off and seal the holes with it. So I can't film a lot, there's not a lot of room, but I'll show what it looks like once I have some done. I'm just going to roll around under the camper with my creeper. This is high enough that I don't need jack stands or anything to hold it up. Here are a couple of holes I'm going to tape over. So here it is with the tape on it. It blends in really nice with the underbody coating. Now some of these had foam in them. I may just tape them from now. So for something like this, I will tape it from the back side and then maybe tape it in a couple different orientations to seal it up as best I can. So I put some small pieces of tape here. I still have a couple more to put in here to seal up around these wires. I will say this stuff is very difficult to cut with scissors. It's really gummed up my scissors. I think it would cut easier with a utility knife. So I'm just going to go around under the camper and I'm going to seal up any of the holes I made or holes that were there or anything else I find that could be sealed. So I did end up shooting a little bit of foam in some of these penetrations where I couldn't get a good seal with the tape. Okay, so one of the final things I did was create this diagram of the wiring. So I just took pictures of the components and put them in LibreOffice and then connected them with connectors. I used red for positive, black for negative. Needless to say, this is not an engineering diagram, but I think it'll be helpful in the future if someone or even myself is working on this. I did notice I left out the isolator switch, but it gives an overall look at how the system is set up. Then on the back side of this, I put a chart with the different components and the terminal sizes, the torque values, and the socket size. So I carry a toolkit with me, but I've noticed that my toolkit does not have a 14 or 17 millimeter socket. It does have an adjustable wrench I could use in an emergency, but I'm going to be purchasing those two sizes and adding them to the kit. So I'll have all the socket sizes to service this equipment. Now it's actually been probably even a week or two since I last worked on this, but in that time I've installed an inverter. So I also took a picture of the inverter and I'm going to include that with this. So this inverter is kind of out of view, but you can reach it. So with this picture, you can know that the bottom switch, if you switch it in this direction, is the remote mode and the top position is the on mode. So one more thing that I need to print out is instructions on how to use this. So I'm still working on that, and I did laminate these sheets also. So I may punch a hole in them and put a ring or something on them. And I'm thinking I'll put a hook or something and kind of hang them right here. And the one on top will be how to use the disconnect. So now I have this switch. When I'm using the RV, I can have it on mode 2. When I'm storing it, I can have it on mode 1. And then it will only charge with solar on mode 1. And I want to give one example of why I want to do that. Here I have the 12 volt RV fridge. And this comes with this spacer here, which allows you to lock the doors in the open position. Let me do the bottom one. So this leaves the fridge vented for storage, so it doesn't get moisture and condensation built up in it. But the problem is, when it's open like this, it does not actuate the switch. So the light stays on all the time. If I come over here and switch it to solar charging mode, that cuts off power to the camper, so this light is no longer on. It also does things like power off the radio and the flashlight charger, so those aren't draining the battery. So those are the final touches of my lithium battery upgrade in my 2021 KZ Escape E17 hatch. Now, is any project ever finished? I do have future plans for this, and I'll likely post the videos for that in my playlist, which I'll put in the description. As I mentioned earlier, I've already installed an inverter back here, so look for that video to come. The inverter currently powers a single outlet, and I'm considering connecting it up to the main power center so you can run the whole RV off of it. But I'm not sure if I'm going to do that yet. Now, I will probably test these out, maybe do some load tests, charging tests, things like that with it. So if there's anything you want to see, drop a comment below, and I'll also put those in my playlist. So that's all I'm going to cover in this video. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you like this video, please click like. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd appreciate if you could do that. And thanks for watching. Until next time, goodbye.